The history of Botswana starts with the San people who were joined by the Ko people approximately 2,300 years ago, when the Ko migrated to the region from eastern Africa. The land that is now Botswana has had a lot of tribes and a lot of major tribes for the history, like a lot that are based on the local dialects, so I'm not going to pronounce them right, and there will be a lot of them, just a warning. The Kalahari people were the first of the Bantu peoples to settle in present-day Botswana, arriving in 200 CE. The first Swana people are estimated to have arrived 400 CE. The Taukome people arrived in present-day Botswana by the 7th century, and their possession of glass beads indicates early connection to Indian Ocean trade. The number of livestock kept in the area increased significantly between the 8th century and the 10th century. The Swana people organized themselves into a tribal government called a Moraf, each led by a chief called a Gosi. This system produced a more hierarchical government rel relative to others in the region. Cattle became a central part of society in the region, and ownership of cattle denoted one's status. The early history of the Swana people remains largely unknown because the little archaeological evidence has been left. Trade routes connected tribes throughout the Kalahari Desert by 900 CE, and access to the Indian Ocean trade expanded in the region over the 10th century. The Tautsui people became the predominant group in present-day Botswana during the 11th and 12th centuries as they became wealthier through ownership of cattle. Neighboring present-day Botswana during the 11th and 12th centuries were the people of Leopard's Cope, who formed the kingdom of Mapungani and projected influence throughout the region. Their influence declined by the 13th century, and they were replaced as a regional power by Great Zimbabwe, as the gold trade became a driving factor in the region's economy. It controlled many of the tribes that existed in what is now northeastern Botswana. After the fall of Great Zimbabwe in the 15th century, several other states developed. The Kingdom of Butua, formed by the Kalanga peoples, was established on the present-day Botswana-Zimbabwe border. Migration of Swana peoples throughout present-day Botswana occurred over the following centuries as they were displaced by native and colonial populations from the south. Large migrations of Kalanga and Sotho Swana people into present-day Botswana occurred during the 15th and 16th centuries, and the Kalanga peoples controlled the land between the Malus River and the Makatagani Pan until the 18th century. The Swana people had a presence throughout present-day Botswana by the 1600s. According to oral tradition, the pastoralist Herero and Bonderu peoples split from the Mbunda people in the 17th century as Swana cattle raids scattered the groups. Oral tradition also holds that the Yei people migrated from the upper Chobe River into the Okavango Delta in the 18th century, though contact between the Yei and the Ko may have existed much longer. The different Swana tribes were able to separate and form independently from one another as the region's primary asset, cattle, is easily transported. The western tribes were especially prone to separation because of the large distances between towns and farmlands. They were often the targets of raids by the Griku people. The first Swana state was formed in the mid-18th century. Subsequent states were formed by the Kwenas people, and the Nwato people, and the Tawana people over the following decades. Sorry if these pronunciations are not that good, because I don't think most people could pronounce these too well. And for the sheer abundance. With these came the development of the Mofado, a militia regiment organized by age group among the eastern Swana peoples in the 1750s. A new group subjugated several peoples in the region and twice won a conflict against the Fokang people. The use of Mefado spread to the western Swana peoples by the end of the century. It was never widely adopted in the south. The Difficane, a period of conflict and displacement in southern Africa, took place during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. During this time, the Tswana people were subject to raids by many groups. Again, most Tswana groups opted to retreat instead of fight. This triggered extensive migration across the region, causing the Tswana tribes to more thoroughly spread and establish a stronger presence throughout the territory of present-day Botswana. They settled primarily in the Hardveld that makes up the eastern region of present-day Botswana. The Quena and Ngwatsis people migrated from Transvaal to the Sandveld. The first of the Gotla peoples to settle in present-day Botswana, the Mana people, migrated from South Africa in the early 19th century, before settling in Moshupa and Hamaga. Only some of the northwestern Tswana peoples were spared displacement or interruption. The Kololo people attacked the northwestern Tswana peoples in 1826, forcing the Quena and Ngwatsi from their respective territories. Sibogo, the regent of the Ngwatsi tribe, raised 4,000 men in their Mefado and surrounded a city where the Kololo were residing. Killing the warriors and the civilians, they permanently expelled the Kololo from the region. The tribes re-established their states in the 1840s, founding several towns and villages of varying sizes. Governance was based around the Gotla, a deliberative form in which the chief or regional leader heard the concerns of most male citizens before making decisions. Now time for the Europeans. European missionaries first arrived in present-day Botswana in 1816 through the London Missionary Society. This and other missionary groups worked to convert the chiefs to Christianity and to build missionary schools. The missionary Robert Moffat set his mission station on the border of present-day Botswana as a barrier against the Boers, so they could not move further inward. Moffat published the first Setswana language text with a uniform orthography, where he began translating Christian texts and wrote a Setswana dictionary. Both the Old and New Testaments could be read in Setswana by 1857. The 19th century Tswana people were several economic ideas that were rare in southern Africa, including credit, service contracts, and the mafisa system of the rich loaning cattle to the poor in exchange for labor. They also had a conception of private property in the mid-19th century, and both married men and married women were entitled to land rights. The men typically herded cattle while the women grew crops. Sorghum was the region's most commonly grown crop in the 19th century. Land was widely available, but droughts meant that farming was inconsistent. British traders arrived in the 1830s and engaged in transactions with the chiefs. The influx of European settlers nearby allowed the Tswana tribes to incorporate themselves into the global economy. Chief Sechel I of the Quena people took advantage of the new trading routes, securing control of British trade for his tribe. The Scottish missionary David Livingstone arrived in Botswana in 1845, where he established the Kolobang mission. This was the beginning of heavier European involvement in the Tswana tribes as they established intercontinental trade routes. Westernized fashion was adopted in urban areas through the rest of the century and combined with traditional clothing. The Tswana peoples faced conflict from other groups in the region. Peaking in the 1850s, many Botswana, particularly the Quena and Ngwado tribes, fought against Afrikaners and Zulu tribes in the eastern Kalahari Desert. The Quena and the Mana fought against Boers from Transvaal in 1852, defending their territory and ending the nation's westward expansion. The Botswana saw invaders and incentivized them converting to Christianity. Sechele requested a British protectorate in 1853 to end regional conflicts, but he was denied. European visitors became more common in the mid-19th century as hunters, explorers, and traders sought profit and adventure in the region. Many wrote travel books about the area, which were some of the only non-academic publications about present-day Botswana at the time. By the 1860s, migration out of the region increased as Botswana men traveled to work in South African mines. The discovery of the Toddy goldfields triggered the first European gold rush of southern Africa in 1868. An early mining camp established in the 1870s expanded greatly as it became a major railway hub between Cape Province and Bulawayo, becoming Botswana's first major city. Francistown. At this point in Botswana's history, the major chiefs were all Christian. A war between the Quena and the Gafela in 1875. By the end of the decade, Chief Khama III of the Ngwado people seized control of British trade from the Quena people. The British feared increasing German influence in the region and agreed to form a Bechuanaland Protectorate. The British wished to preserve its influence over the Tswana tribes as they provide a connection between southern and central Africa. Tswana chiefs feared an encroachment by German Southwest Africa and the Afrikaners, and they believed that the alternative to British control was settler colonialism by Germany. They also wished to avoid falling under the control of South Africa or mining magnate Cecil Rhodes, though the Protectorate still found itself depending on South Africa economically. The centralization of British rule in South Africa meant that the Bechuanaland Protectorate was economically dependent on it. The British government believed the Bechuanaland Protectorate to be only a temporary entity and expected that it would soon be absorbed by a British colony. In the meantime, it believed that a self-sufficient protectorate would cost less to maintain. For these reasons, the colonial administration imposed very little direct control of the Bechuanaland Protectorate. The chiefs benefited from these affairs and were able to empower and enrich themselves. They retained broad autonomy, but colonial backing meant that they no longer needed the consent of the tribes to maintain rule. Tribal rule became autocratic, which led to human rights abuses and discrimination against women and ethnic minorities. The British planned to eventually incorporate the Bechuanaland Protectorate into the Union of South Africa. In the years after the Protectorate's creation, the United Kingdom entered talks with Cecil Rhodes to absorb it into the British South African Company. In response, three of the most influential chiefs made a diplomatic trip to the United Kingdom in 1895 and convinced the government not to complete this deal. This set a precedent of chiefs interacting with the British as a unified group, and enshrined these three figures as early figures in Botswana's history as a single nation. Rhodes' handling of a failed Jameson raid discouraged the British and negotiations were postponed indefinitely. The celebration of these chiefs resulted in the publication of three great African chiefs. These texts introduced a founding myth that their three respective tribes were created by three brothers. Also in 1895, the capital was moved from Vryburg to another South African city, Mafeking, and the Ancient Ruins Company was registered to dig up prehistoric ruins in Bechuanaland and Rhodesia in search for gold. The Protectorate was heavily affected by the 1890s African rinderpest epizootic, losing large portions of its livestock and wild game. The Protectorate's railroad was built in 1897 as the main north-south transit line. The early colonial economy of the Bechuanaland Protectorate remained much the same as a pre-colonial economy. The United Kingdom primarily used the Protectorate as a supply of labor, offering high wages to Botswana, who migrated south to work in mines. Taxes were also imposed, beginning with a hut tax in 1899, which was then replaced by a poll tax in 1909. A native tax was later imposed in 1919. Colonial taxes in the Bechuanaland Protectorate were higher than those in neighboring colonies, causing a mass exodus to the south, and the chiefs allowed more generous powers, sharing with citizens to incentivize them to stay. The United Kingdom considered integrating the Protectorate into South Africa as a unified Southern African colonies, but ultimately grouped them economically by creating the South African Customs Union. Membership entailed the Protectorate to only 2% of the Union's revenue. By 1910, all Tswana tribes had adopted Christianity. Bechuanaland sent several hundred soldiers to assist the British Army during World War I. The London Missionary Society found itself in decline at the time and had gradually lost influence over the Protectorate. The British government took a more active role in the Protectorate's governance beginning in 1930. That year, it began providing direct funding to the Protectorate. Fears of German attack in Bechuanaland grew and then led to World War II, due to its strategic position between Britain's central and southern colonies in Africa. 11 days before war was declared, the British government warned the Protectorate to be on standby, and military forces were organized. 4 days after, Britain declared war in Germany. Resident Commissioner Arden Clark held a meeting with the chiefs where they pledged full support for the war effort.
The earliest years of World War II had almost no effect on the people of Bechuanaland, and many only had a vague idea that the war existed. The colonial administration shrank as large numbers of white residents enlisted in the British Army. Those who remained were focused on security planning in case Southern Africa became another front in the war. Against the wishes of the chiefs, the colonial administration encouraged Botswana, who wished to serve with the British Army, to enlist with the South African Native Military Corps. Around 300 Botswana men enlisted with the group. Maintaining the Bechuanaland Protectorate became a low priority for the United Kingdom during the Great Depression and World War II, and the Protectorate received no funding from the United Kingdom during the war. The British Empire had relatively little control over Bechuanaland compared with other territories, and British efforts to control wartime production in the Protectorate was unsuccessful. The war drastically altered the Protectorate's economy as it went on, introducing shortages, rationing, and higher prices. Military recruitment began in Bechuanaland in 1941. Around 5,500 men were trained and sent to war within the first 6 months. Another 5,000 Botswana men joined the war in 1942. In total, approximately 11,000 soldiers from Bechuanaland fought alongside the British Army during the war. Over 10,000 of these served in the British Army's African Auxiliary Pioneer Corps. The chiefs wished to leverage their participation in the war for additional rights within the British Empire, and the fear of the British defeat would make them subjects of Germany or South Africa, a fate they wished to avoid. Relative to other nations in the British Empire, the people of Bechuanaland approved of the war. Many Botswana held a sense of loyalty to the empire or felt that their interests were aligned. After World War II, political parties formed like the Bechuanaland Protectorate Federal Party, which was a kickstarter to start problems in independence movements. The Bechuanaland Protectorate Development Plan 1963-1968 was drafted through a deliberative process in 1963, creating an outline for the nation's independence. The future capital of Gaborone was built in 1965 and declared the new capital. It was built on British Crown land, which to provide a neutral location, not controlled by any one tribe. The Constitution was implemented the same year. With this in effect, the United Kingdom granted the Protectorate self-governance. The Protectorate was granted full independence as the Republic of Botswana in 1966. Independence from Botswana meant the implementation of liberal democracy, bringing about elections, human rights protections, and civil service. Over the next decades, Botswana has had many ups and downs, including a dictator, but they ended up with a very good country. Botswana is one of the most developed countries in the entire continent of Africa, even through the pandemic. That is the end of the history of Botswana.